the fact that credit card debt is skyrocketing as savings rates are plunging, this is very problematic for the economy. It shows that Americans are struggling to make ends meet. Not only do they have multiple jobs, you have moonlighting surging as people are taking second and third jobs, but even that's not enough. Even with multiple paychecks, they still can't pay the bills, so they are resorting to credit cards. But another important fact that nobody is talking about when it comes to credit is that credit is expanding, particularly consumer credit. It is growing at a near record pace. Now, when I talk about inflation on this podcast, I often talk about inflation as defined by an expansion of the money supply, which is what it is. But inflation is also an expansion of the supply of credit. In fact, a lot of the dictionaries that used to define inflation correctly defined it as an expansion of the supply of money and credit. Credit was a big part of the equation because people could use credit to buy things and bid up prices. And that, in fact, is what's happening. Consumers are dealing with rising prices, not so much by cutting back and buying less, although in some circumstances they are, but they're also taking advantage of credit so that they can keep on buying the same amount and just making up the difference by borrowing money. So the Federal Reserve is still keeping interest rates too low and allowing credit to grow too plentifully so that additional credit is available to consumers to continue to bid up higher prices. And so they're not being priced out of the markets because they're staying in the market because of their access to credit. So, in other words, the inflation is continuing in the credit markets. What the Fed really needs to do with its rate hikes is raise rates significantly enough to cut off all that consumer credit. Credit card companies have to stop lending people money so those people will spend less and save more. But as long as credit is plentiful, available, and even though interest rates are 20%, apparently that's not discouraging the borrowers. What we need is for the lenders to wake up to the reality that a lot of the people who are borrowing this money are never going to pay it back. We need credit card companies to cut off these consumers because I think most consumers are going to keep on borrowing as long as the credit card companies are dumb enough to keep on lending. And one of the big moral hazards that nobody really talks about in the credit card industry is the more money that you owe on the credit card. Once you've gone beyond the point where you know you can't pay it back, so you're already in so deep that you know you can never repay your debt and that eventually you're going to file for bankruptcy. Between now and then, well, the sky's the limit. Just run up as big a tab as you possibly can because if you know at the end of the day you're filing bankruptcy and you're not going to pay for any of the stuff that you buy using your credit card, you are going to buy as much stuff on that credit card as you can before you file bankruptcy. So it's up to these credit card companies to take a look at how much debt their customers have already racked up and cut them off. Because once you know you're just playing with the house's money, if I have $50,000 in credit card debt and I'm going to default on it, well, why not run it up to 100,000 if I can? It's not going to hurt my future credit any worse to go bankrupt owing 100,000 than it will owing 50,000. So if I can still borrow the extra 50, I might as well do it because after I file for bankruptcy, I can't do that anymore because now I've ruined my credit for a while. So I might as well buy as much as I can now, knowing that after I go bankrupt, I'm not going to be able to buy anything. And when you buy a bunch of stuff on a credit card and then don't pay for it because you declare bankruptcy, the credit card company doesn't take your stuff. Everything that you bought, you get to keep. And so there is a massive moral hazard there because if you know you're not going to pay your credit card bill, you're basically getting stuff for nothing. Well, if you can get stuff for nothing, well, buy as much as you can. Why not buy it if it doesn't cost anything? The reason that people don't buy things is because they're too expensive. If everything was free, well, you would take whatever you can get. And that's what happens. In fact, that may be one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of consumer spending, even though the underlying economy is weak. The consumers are simply doing the smart thing because they have so much debt. They know they're never going to pay it back. They're going to go bankrupt and they want to go out with a bang and they want to buy as much as they can now. So this is not a sign of how strong the economy is, but how weak the economy is. It's not a sign of consumer strength. It's a sign of weakness, but it also proves that the consumers aren't idiots. They will take advantage of any opportunities they have, and that is exactly what they're doing when they're borrowing money that they know they're never going to have to repay and effectively getting stuff for free. And they don't look at it as a crime because what they're doing is not illegal. And since it's not illegal, well, they figure they might as well do it. And if they don't do it, well, their friends are doing it. So why be the only honorable person? Because what are they going to get for taking the moral high ground? Nothing. And since no one who chooses the low road is going to be punished, when you come to that fork, the direction is obvious. When you're running your own business, your employees can create all kinds of interesting and frustrating situations. But the more significant issue here is not just that all this additional consumer credit and debt is indicative of a weak economy. It's also indicative that the Fed is losing its battle against inflation because the Fed has to rein in credit. The Fed has to raise interest rates in order to restrict credit. That's the purpose of these rate hikes. Again, what the Fed needs to do is discourage people from spending and encourage people to save. That's the purpose of these rising interest rates. But that's not happening. The Fed is raising interest rates, but consumers don't care. They're just borrowing more money and spending more money. So this credit supply is expanding, and that's going to continue to put upward pressure on prices. The Fed is making no real headway in its battle against inflation. All that we've seen is a temporary correction in commodity prices, a downturn in house prices, but beneath the surface, the inflationary forces are as strong as ever. In fact, they're getting stronger. And so all these people who are expecting a meaningful reduction in the inflation rate in 2023 aren't going to get what they expect. After a brief downturn in the official numbers, we're going to see a surge as consumers continue to spend borrowed money, but more importantly, as the dollar tanks, putting huge upward pressure not only on commodities, causing a reversal and a run to new highs, but on the record level of imports, because everything America buys, and of course, most of the stuff, the merchandise that we buy is made abroad, all that stuff is going to get a lot more expensive as the dollar falls. And the other reason, of course, that people think that inflation may come down in 2023 is they think the unemployment rate will go up, and they expect a rise in unemployment to bring down inflation. In fact, many people still think that's the Fed's goal, that the Fed's plan is to fight inflation by fighting employment, by causing an increase in unemployment, by causing a slowdown at the rate at which wages are rising. People think that rising wages cause inflation, and so the Fed needs to slow down wage growth with its rate hikes. But rising wages don't cause inflation. In fact, looking at wages going up and concluding that's the reason for inflation is like somebody who's sick and they have a fever, and so they take their temperature with a thermometer, and then the thermometer says 102, and they blame their fever on the thermometer. Well, it's not the thermometer's fault. It's just reflecting your temperature. Well, that's the same thing with wages. Rising wages aren't causing inflation. Inflation is causing wages to rise. So the wages are simply taking the economy's temperature when it comes to inflation. Now, you can't fight inflation by trying to stop wages from going up. That would be like trying to fight your fever by smashing your thermometer, or maybe lowering the reading by putting the thermometer in a cup of ice water. That's not going to work. If you ignore the underlying illness and just try to cover up the symptoms or deny they're there, then you're going to get sicker. The same thing is going to happen with inflation. If the Fed is thinking that rising wages are the problem and it tries to solve that or cover that up, then the underlying actual problem that is causing wages to go up is going to continue, and that's inflation. And in fact, the reality is, to the extent that the Fed does succeed in putting people out of work, that is actually going to be inflationary because people are going to stop working, but they're not going to stop spending. They're going to continue to have access to money either through the government or through credit cards, and they're going to keep on spending, fueling demand, but they're not going to be producing. And so you get less supply of goods and services and you get more demand. What the Fed really wants to do with employment is maintain it. In fact, we need more people productively employed, not fewer. It's just that the people who are employed have to stop spending their paychecks. They have to take more of their paychecks and put it in the bank, pay off their credit card debt. That's what they have to do.